Welcome to Chromaticus. Today we're going to walk through the process of composing a piece of music in the D Dorian mode using something called modal progressions. This is just one of the many ways to compose modal music, and it's fairly simple. Let's listen to the piece first and then we'll break it down. Oh, quick note for guitar players, there is a tab version for you to follow along with. This could easily be a song played on the guitar with a band. It doesn't have to be an orchestra piece. I just happen to like writing that type of music, so that's the direction that I went. But all these techniques apply to any style of music. Alright, here it is. Before we can begin to write modal progressions, we need to know two things. One, what is the characteristic note of the mode, and what are the options for chords? If you look at the modal progression chart, you'll see that the characteristic note is the natural 6th degree, in this case B natural. Whether you're using triads or 7th chords, you only have one tonic chord, the D minor or D minor 7. The cadence chords, which lead to or precede the tonic chord, always contain the characteristic note of the mode. This is how you sound the color of a specific mode. Think about it this way. If I just vamp on a D minor 7 chord, there's nothing telling me in the chord that the mode is Dorian. My ear only knows that it's some type of minor key. So I would have to use B natural somewhere in the melody to signal that it's the Dorian mode, or if you look back at the chart, you can use the cadence chords since they contain the 6th degree of the mode as a chord tone. So if I play a D minor 7 and then I throw in an E minor chord, that chord is now telling our ears that there is a B natural present in the key that we are in. Now these other chords that are not labeled are sometimes called non-tonic chords, and sometimes they're called approach chords because they can approach or precede either of the cadence chords. The diminished chord is an avoid chord in modal progressions. The G7 and C major 7 can also be considered avoid chords because it's really easy to accidentally cadence out of Dorian and into the key of C major if you use those chords. However, they do both contain that characteristic note of the mode, so you can use them, but you must exercise a great deal of caution, and that's why I label these chords as caution chords. Basically, you can use a G7 cadencing to D minor 7, and then just make sure there's no C major chords around, which sort of forces your ear to hear it as a 4 chord and a 1 chord. The other thing you can do is just stick to the triad versions. The C is no longer a cadence chord, but the G is. The other possibility is to avoid both chords altogether, which you can certainly do. Also, using the C chord in an inversion on an upbeat instead of a strong downbeat can help to keep it from sounding like a 1 chord, so there are quite a lot of different approaches you can take. Now let's get back to the basics of our composition. We start, of course, with a D minor 7 chord. I could have just vamped on that for a while and used B in the melody, but I wanted a little more variety in the harmony. In bar 2, we have an A minor 7, which is an approach chord, and an E minor 7, which is a cadence chord, leading back to D minor 7 in the next bar. I use some inversions again just for some variety and movement. I play the G triad first, and then the G7 chord. This was pretty common in classical and romantic era music, and it's something that I like to do. And we're back to D minor 7 in bar 5, and then I use 2 approach chords in a row before the final cadence to D minor 7. Just to be clear, it's not common for a composer to write down a full 8 or 12 bars of chords and then go back and write a melody. Typically, they're written together back and forth as you go. I just did this to show you how modal progressions work, strictly as an educational tool. Now that we have our basic harmonic structure down, let's write a melody. Our first fragment of our melody looks like this. I then took that motif and I used what's called a tonal sequence. Basically, I shifted that motif down a minor third. For a deep dive into melodic manipulation techniques, I'll post a link somewhere up here or down in the description. You really should know all those techniques. They're very useful for writing a melody, and they're especially helpful if you have writer's block. For the pickup note, I added a note, which means I also had to use a rhythmic diminution to fit in the extra note, to just sort of give the pickup note a little more liveliness. Going into bar 3, I left that pickup note the same as the rhythm, I just changed the note. In bar 3, I wrote a new motif. It's a little more percussive, but it's similar in a way that keeps it cohesive with the first part of the melody. It's similar in the sense that this motif has 4 16th notes with the last one tied, and this motif has 4 16th notes all ascending with a rest afterwards, and then an emphasized note here. And then I did the same thing with this motif and I just sequenced it down and finally land on our characteristic note in bar 4. In bar 5, we start with a repetition of the original motif, but I alter the ending. I use an inversion and an intervallic diminution. What that means is that instead of moving down a third, down a second, I moved up a second and up a second. This repetition of the motif with some alteration keeps the melody cohesive with the beginning, but also sounding fresh at the same time. I did the same thing with these two notes here. I changed the notes as well as the direction they move. Measure 6, I added a note for a little rhythmic variety. The second motif is repeated again with one change of note at the end, although I also changed the harmony underneath as well. And then I just sequence the last two notes upwards to G and D to finalize the ending, so to speak. Let's listen to the final piece one more time. There you have a Dorian modal composition using modal progressions. Stay tuned for the next episode where we walk through the Phrygian mode. Alright, thanks for watching. See you next time.